Hello, everybody. Welcome to Grow Yourself from the Inside Out, and welcome to my podcast. This is episode 8, and really have an really interesting topic with a bit of a different twist than maybe you've heard before. But I want to start off by sort of reiterating what I had suggested in my recent post about this podcast, this particular episode, and that is, we all okay, let's say many of us. I don't know if it's all or most or whatever the case might be, but as a coach, I run into this a fair amount, and that is that we all have baggage. It's not an either or. Either you have baggage or you don't. So it's on a continuum. I mean, some have a lot of baggage. You've probably met these people that are very difficult to deal with, or they have serious self-esteem problems or serious anger problems. All of that typically comes from baggage. And when I say baggage, of course, you all know what that is. That is stuff, perhaps traumatic events from our life or how we were brought up, or a whole host of things. People that are bullied, if they're bullied early on, they end up with some baggage. So the point is that, yeah, baggage is, suppressed or repressed, perhaps memories of situations that have happened to us over our life. And so we grow up, and that trauma, if you want to put it that way, and again, even though I use the term trauma, I don't necessarily mean that it was just like this egregious event that took place, but could be certain habits or things that happen to you over a period of time that eventually, it gets covered up in your psychology over the years, but it works its way back out and begins to manifest itself in different ways. Some people become narcissists. Some people, as I mentioned earlier, have severe depression, have self-esteem, self-confidence problems. They're hard to deal with. I mean, just so many different ways that it can manifest itself. And so one of the things that we're going to talk about, though, in this episode is that you don't you don't have to live with that baggage. You don't have to live the rest of your life, I guess you could say, in agony or suffering in silence for some of us. I would admit that it's not necessarily an easy thing to get rid of traumatic events from our life, or from our childhood, or whatever the case might be. But even without a psychologist, I always suggest to you, or a therapist or whatever, that you can work on it. You can get better. You can build a different mindset and a different attitude. Depending on the situation, it certainly can be difficult for some. And others, it's just a matter of trying to tweak maybe your personality that's coming out because of, let's say you grew up in a family where, people fought all the time. Okay, you may not come out with just like this horrendous scrapper, but you may have a tendency to do that, you see. But it's not overwhelming. The point is that some people don't want to live with that baggage or behave like that way. And so, they might be judgmental, and they say, I don't like call people out or talk down to people, but I am judgmental, and I like to do something about that. So that's my point, is that you don't necessarily have to live with that. But so how do you do that? Well, one way is working on your mindset. You know, Trying to develop what we call a growth mindset is the place to start. And a growth mindset is it's a way of thinking. It's a way of proceeding. It's a way of shifting. It's an attitude. It's an intention to grow, to get better. By the way, that's what this podcast is all about. Grow yourself from the inside out is just that. It's a podcast to help us all grow. And by the way, the fact that I'm here as the host, or I'm a personal development or personal growth coach, got my own stuff to work on. I have to grow too. So this is not just for you, but for me too, and for everybody else that's included. So, and I said, it's not, so the growth mindset, or growing out of this temperament, growing out of this baggage, sort of unloading that baggage, becomes a journey. And again, depending on how you deal with it, and other variables, you can eventually settle into a more peaceful way. So why is it important? Why do you do that? Well, first of all, as I said, it manifests itself in one way or the other. And obviously, and well, I shouldn't say obviously, but often it is with some sort of either destructive behavior, destructive attitude, negative attitude. Um, and then more than that, you can end up passing it on to others, like your kids, or you can destroy your relationships or strain your relationships. And so, this is all, of course, the reason why you want to move into a growth mindset, develop more of a positive attitude, and do this. Well, listen, my guest, he knows this all too well. He, I would first define him as a courageous man to put his baggage out there on the street for us to hear and, by the way, learn from. So we won't only learn from what what he will describe, how he grew up, and some of the baggage that he carried around for a while, but he set out on a journey to heal himself. And because it was impacting his family, his wife, and his kids, he also needed to heal them, if you will. And he'll clarify this more, and and he'll tell you that this destructive behavior and attitude that he had did nearly cost him his marriage, and dearly and nearly costed his relationship with his kids. But he decided to change. And so my guest is on a mission to heal and to help others heal. He has decided that you know taking his pain and his wisdom that came from that and try to help you, me, from these sorts of problems, no matter where you're at in this journey. So that's what we're going to talk about. But it's important to know that this is not just a conversation about, our baggage and the drama that goes with it. It's really a conversation about hope and transformation. And we're going to be talking to you about, being a better you, if you will, learning to love more, love other people. I mentioned in one of my posts that last episode, we talked about loving yourself. And listen, it certainly can be argued that that's where you start. Learn to love yourself, and you're more capable of loving others. But this podcast is going to be about loving others. Now, I want to say before I introduce my guest that this podcast is only general information. We're not healthcare providers or psychologists, albeit he might be very studied up on it, though. But you have to know that this is not medical advice or psychological or therapy or anything like that. And and I just have to say it because it's an important disclaimer that, if you have some serious issues, you need to consult really with a medical professional, a therapist, a licensed healthcare professional. I need to put that on the table because that's very important as we move forward. So my guest is Mike Forrester. He's actually a men's transformation coach, but listen, will there be any doubt in your mind that this will apply to anyone? But this is the road that he decided to go down. And I understand that because men are harder headed than women. And so we need more help. And so I'm sure the business is out there, plenty of business for him with men. But in any event, it applies to anybody. He's the founder of Living Fearless coaching programs and the host of Living Fearless Today podcast. Fascinating podcast. I did have a chance to listen to a couple episodes. In fact, listen to another one. Wasn't his podcast, but another interview. It's just really fascinating. His decades of experience of overcoming failures, setbacks, and struggles fuels his clients to overcome their own self-doubt. With this personal journey through overcoming childhood trauma, dyslexia, and loss of loved ones, Mike is determined to set the example to not allow excuses for you to derail yourself. His podcast, Living Fearless Today, focuses on helping men overcome fear, anxiety, and depression by highlighting success stories of those who have lived through it. His insights, methods, and stories of building post-traumatic growth. I've never heard of that. I like that. Post-traumatic growth. I'm going to ask him if he coined that concept there. Building post-traumatic growth have been featured on various podcasts, including Hanging On to Hope, Extreme Health, and April Garcia's Pivot. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome transformation coach Mike Forrester.
Kevin,
Mike, welcome to Grow Yourself podcast. Man, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your story and giving us some wisdom. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, listen, I just want to start off as I typically do and just ask you, who is Mike
Mhm.
Forrester?
So, Mike Forster is a dude like any other that grew up with a passive father and a mom who was just angry with herself and the world around her. So,
Mm,
two manipulative parents that, you know, then passed that pattern on to me. And then I continued growing up, you know, didn't
wow.
realize at the time I had dyslexia. It wasn't until I was 40 years old and two of our children, my wife's homeschooling them, two of our four children aren't retaining. And we go in for testing. It's like, surprise. So,
Wow.
as I was growing up, my parents were very clear in their messaging.
Mm,
You're a mistake. You won't ever amount to anything. You don't have value. Those kind of things from your parents who, they're loving you the best that they
yeah.
can,
Yeah.
but they're in a place of hurt on their own. And I'm sure you've heard it, hurt people hurt people. That's
Mm,
exactly what was going on. And, not to make them into, like monsters or anything like that.
mm-hmm.
Having parented in that same way, I understand. I hope my children have grace on me, and that
Mm,
was
yeah.
what I am sure they wanted as well.
Yeah.
So, um, I entered into a relationship, with this amazing lady who is now my wife. But like you talked about the baggage, the trauma that I went through. Guess what? I brought that into the
Mm,
relationship, into the marriage, into my parenting, into who I was at work, and it just created multiple areas of issues. And so,
wow.
whereas I felt insecure with myself, then I'm in all these different places going, I don't feel like I'm measuring up.
Yeah.
So it's it's something like you talked about, men, women, we can all relate to feeling out of place and like we're not functioning at our best or really even being accepted. We're
Yeah.
competent where we're at. So
Mike, when you talk about these things, of course, there's the journey in and of itself of dealing with this upbringing that you go through. I would imagine different phases where you don't understand maybe as a kid,
yeah,
and then later as an adolescent or a young, you don't quite understand. You understand it, but you don't know why. And maybe you get to a place where, because what I hear you say, and I think I've heard you say in other podcasts,
mm-hmm,
it's you're not trying to throw your parents under the bus. You don't believe that
mm-hmm,
they didn't necessarily love you, but
yeah,
the reality is the reality of the circumstance, right?
yeah. And I mean,
I think it's important.
it is very important. I mean, the thing I didn't understand back then, Kevin, was that I was mad at my parents. Like
Mm,
I hated my parents is the way I would
fair
phrase it
enough.
back then,
Hmm.
because of what I went through. And I swore I would never be like my parents. You can imagine because you've worked with enough
Hmm.
people that
Hmm.
I came out a clone. If you took them and mashed them
Hmm.
up, that was me. Um, but the whole thing is, they went through their own stuff, and what
Right.
they learned and acted out was exactly what I then learned and acted out. The thing is, I have the opportunity because it's one of those of, as a husband and a father, I can choose to address me, to heal me,
Mm,
to take a look and let that go and move in a healthy direction,
mm,
to break this chain, to break the pattern, to be like a generational change maker.
yeah.
Or I can choose to take the easy route, the comfortable one, and continue letting my children operate in those patterns.
Yeah.
The thing that really scared me though was, okay, great. I know that my children are, you know, at that point they were already into their, preteen, teens, and, they're moving along. They've already been with me for all those years. how I was. But the problem was,
Yeah.
I've got grandchildren on the horizon.
Yes.
Do I really want to inflict that legacy upon them?
Yes.
No way. None of us as parents even want to do that to our children. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we're not we're not hate mongers who are going, I don't like my children, so I'm going to do this to them. It
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
add
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. No. 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 Right.
So,
And even in your, some proceed this way unknowingly, unconscious, or that it's happening, and then others, I won't turn this into a religious conversation, but even Paul in the Bible used to say all the time. I say this all the time, so people who listen to my podcast regularly have heard me say this. He often said, why am I doing the things, he's praying, why do I do the things I don't want to do? And I think we all, so many of us fall into that category. Certainly I do.
mhm.
I want to give a shout out to my son, Kevin Mendoza, who's here, and I'm hoping that I didn't traumatize him that much as he was growing up, but it's good to see him here. Well, listen, Mike, do you mind sort of giving a little bit of a background of,
Sure.
because I know, particularly of your mother, she struggled with some illnesses.
Oh,
And
yeah.
do you mind talking and giving some context to how you ended up in a position where you believed that you needed to heal?
Yeah. I would say that the big thing came about. So my mom suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, and she had the opportunity to get help. But there's that uncomfortable difference of how she had been, and then the
Mm,
medication made her feel different because she's in a different place.
mm.
And even though it was more normalized, a healthier place, it it wasn't something she was familiar with, and that
Wow.
unfamiliarity caused her to just ditch it. And both she and my dad took off and hid from the courts. um, that was when I was in my late 30s, and I've heard about shock, like how your body gets cold and everything if you get physically injured. That was my first experience of
Wow.
emotional shock, because as I was talking with the court clinician, counselor, um, she's like, "Where are your parents?" I have no idea, and that's the exact way I want to keep it. I put boundaries around them to keep my family and myself in a better place. But
Mm.
as I'm talking with her, she was shedding light on stuff.
The
And
counselor.
yes, yes, sir. So as we're going through it, she's like, "Yeah, your mom has been diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic," and I'm sharing because she's asking about what was your childhood experience, and I was, sharing this with her, and you want to believe what you've gone through, what your life experiences have been, are normal. And when somebody tells you, "Hey, that's abnormal. I'm sorry that you've gone through that," it it can be unsettling. And it was so much
Yes.
so to the point that I went into emotional shock, and it was like I had jumped into a frozen lake. I'm in the polar bear club, and yet I'm in my bedroom. There's no water around me. I'm just shivering. And so emotions are
Mm.
a super strong thing, often to the point beyond of what we give them credit for. But yeah, she suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, had the chance to get help, and didn't want it. And, that was very clear to me, where I really needed to work on setting that better, healthier pattern. One, for myself, because like you talked about earlier, until I heal myself, I can't work on the relationship with my children, because I had done that before in the past to manipulate and gain trust. And when you've manipulated people, trust becomes harder and harder to really set in and to be something that's granted to you. And I had worn out, my opportunities because I had done it so much. That was something I had learned. And yeah, she
Wow.
she unfortunately didn't want help. So
Yeah. But did you, when you learned about this, did you then also suffer from guilt about how you felt about her once you realized that she was struggling, you know, with
hmm,
this disorder?
I I think at that point I had gotten far enough along
I
to
see.
where I had dealt with how I felt about them,
Yeah.
because unfortunately, man, I mean, they didn't want to have reconciliation. It
It's
wasn't
interesting.
just the whole, mental, paranoid schizophrenia. It was also as far as any kind of reconciliation relationally. They didn't want to pursue it. And so,
With you.
Correct. Yeah.
Interesting.
I
Wow.
mean, but we all make choices,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure.
And so my choices along the way were, hey, you can hold on to the unforgiveness and the hate that you have for your parents, or you can release it and keep free yourself from the bondage, because you know
Yeah.
lack of forgiveness
Yeah.
keeps us hostage. It
Yes.
doesn't do anything to the other person. And so I was holding myself at a detrimental place.
Yeah.
And so I had started working through some of that stuff because that was part of me getting to a healthier place.
Yeah.
So I would say at that point, honestly, wasn't feeling guilt for that. I was more feeling guilt for what I how I had behaved and how that had impacted my relationship. Because in
I
order to
see.
gain my parents' approval, because that's what I want. I mean, I want my
Yeah.
dad to go, "Hey, you're a man." I want
Yeah.
my mom to go, "Hey, I love you." They weren't in a place to give it, and so I was throwing my wife under the bus in
Mm.
our relationship and emotionally to try and gain their approval. Sacrificing her and us, and it finally became clear, hey, you may want this,
Wow.
but they're not in a place to give it. I, you can't change it if somebody
Yeah.
doesn't want to step in. Like the only person I can change, me.
Yeah.
you
But boy,
know
I can think. I mean, it makes me think about sort of this layering effect that takes place. That all the way from I mean, just the different things that continue to come out of this just layer on top of your own psyche and cause more and more trauma. I mean, there's just so many things.
Yeah.
So, could I ask, maybe, could you just maybe express one behavior that your mother exhibited towards you that you then maybe you, or maybe you have or haven't, actually it's another question.
Yeah.
How could you draw the correlation between how you were treated and how you then also exhibited either the same behavior or a baby behavior out of that?
Yeah. No, the manipulation goes straight back,
Okay.
Kevin. She would, and as my brother and I were young, well, even into our adults, but you become a little wiser once you're stepping
Mm-hmm.
out of the home environment and you're detached from it. But as children, my brother and I were both manipulated for each of them. So one would do it to gain our approval and our attention, the other one would do it to try and gain it from the other side. And
Wow.
so it was almost like a bipartisan kind of dysfunctional house.
Very interesting. This typically happens when people divorce, but I don't think it's as common in doing it while in the
Yeah.
home. Is
They
that, you
should
think?
have, for all intents
Yeah.
and purposes.
Yeah.
I mean, they were emotionally detached from each
Yeah.
other, and the
But I'm
threat
talking
was
about the,
always,
the idea of them manipulating their kids, that two
oh
divorced parents try to manipulate their kids to like one more than the other.
yeah,
But you're having it right at the same time inside the same home.
yeah, and for all intents and purposes, they had talked about divorce.
I see.
My dad would talk about his glory days when he was in the military, and my mom would talk about her days before she married him, and say both had their life in their heads away from the other, and
Mm,
that was the highlight
I
of their
see.
life. And so they were just emotionally devoid and detached from the
Wow.
other. And so I mean, all intents and purposes, they were divorced, but just hadn't made it official through the
Okay.
legal system, and actually separated it.
Wow.
So I mean, it was interesting. It it definitely played out. Um, the manipulation played out in how I interacted with my wife and my children. Trying to,
So talk
um,
about that. How
yeah.
what your behaviors turned into.
Um, so if my wife and I got into an argument, I'm going to come at her angry. That was just my default. That was what I saw my parents react, and that was way different than what she was raised with. So I knew it was a quick escalation, right? And she didn't like that kind of conflict. So she's going to want to settle it down. So if the anger didn't work, then I would try and come in with, remorse.
Mm,
It's fake. I mean,
Fake.
don't misunderstand. It's not a genuine, like, hey,
Yeah.
I'm genuinely sorry. Let me please come back and reconcile this.
Right.
It was just a manipulation factor. And if that didn't work, I'd come at a different way. I mean, it was trying to push different buttons to get the reaction to see, okay, what is the pattern? Because we all
Wow.
learn how another person will respond to our behavior. And that's all that was. And it was the same thing with the children. Although the children have different ways to diffuse me,
Hmm.
to just be like, hey, I'm escaping dad at that time. Um, it was trying to push them as well to get
Wow.
their behavior to fall in line. So it was all
Constant
about
mind
control,
games.
Kevin.
Yeah. And constant mind games, it sounds like. And that's,
Very much
obviously
so.
very, very destructive. Wow, that's crazy. So, so you believe that, well, I mean, you've proven it, I guess, but you believe that other people that are suffering from this sort of outcome in their life, this baggage, that they can begin to heal themselves from that. I'm curious, yeah, how, first of all, what was the pivotal moment for you? That you said,
Mhm.
Mike, it's time to change. It's this is just not good.
There were there were multiple attempts leading up to it, Kevin, where I wanted to change, but I wasn't sold out to change.
I see.
And so that created its own kind of problem because as people see you change and then you
Mm.
revert, it's
Yeah,
that whole trust thing.
trust. Yeah.
They become reticent on trusting you just as you're changing. So it takes longer
Right.
and longer to build that trust. What happened to really get me to change was when I was still working in corporate IT, was I was seeing guys that were younger than me that seemed to have stuff together. And I'm like, okay, this is a double whammy.
Mm.
Like, you guys are younger than me and you're in a better place than me. And what I had grown up with was asking questions was a sign of weakness. If you're asking for help, that's not a good thing. That's not strength. The other thing was, if you fail, that makes you a failure. And so
Mm.
I'm going through, remember, I'm you know, telling you that like control is my thing. And so if I'm the one controlling my life and I'm guiding it, and yet I'm not in a place that says, this is where I want to be, this is success personified, family, career, all that, who's at fault? Well, I am.
Mm.
And that didn't set well. So I became so desperate that I asked for help and said, guys, what are you doing differently? And that set me down a path of getting help through books, podcasts,
Wow.
mentors, coaches, just, and I didn't get it right. It has taken time, and
Yeah,
I'm still going through stuff, Kevin, because
I
it's,
can believe it.
like you've talked about the layers.
Hmm.
There is stuff that triggers off. And an example of that most recently, I'm in Kansas, and we had a power surge which caused a large water main to burst in the city here. Well, they put us on a water boil alert, like, hey, don't drink it until you've boiled it or you'll get sick. And in boiling that water, it set me back to my childhood
Mm.
because remember, my mom is paranoid schizophrenic. So when our water heater goes out in our duplex, she doesn't want to let anybody know, as far as the landlord, because then they'll come in and they'll see something that she's not comfortable with and they'll know her business, even though we have
Mm.
none. you know, so
Wow.
we were either taking cold showers or we were boiling water to then take like a sponge bath. So the
Wow.
boiling of water immediately took me back to my childhood and my disdain for, being in that situation where I can't take a hot shower. Um, and so it's just interesting. I mean, I've been on this journey for a while, and it's like things still
Yeah.
come up. They go
Still come
back.
up. I can
Yeah.
imagine that, because many people, I think, would, I guess you could say, be triggered later in life, but have no idea why they were triggered. They
Yeah.
they just go, they you just lose your mind. I mean, down to like getting seriously angry about something, or just breaking down and crying, but cannot put two and two together. They don't recognize that it was some part of their childhood.
Mhm.
The other thing I want to ask you about, or sort of mention and I guess ask at the same time, is that when we grow up as kids and we have these sorts of experience. Now yours, I would submit, was an extreme, more of an extreme version. I mean, having
Mhm.
a parent that's a paranoid schizophrenic and some of the things that go with that. I remember listening to one of your podcasts, and your mom thought that when the TV would start showing snow, that
Yeah.
it was a neighbor or something that was doing that. And
Right.
so I'm just saying that so that is a bit extreme. But the point is that if you I could even say this with the military. So I grew up in the military lifestyle, and I know you're a fellow brat. I
Yeah.
have to say this though. I heard your dad was Air Force and went to Navy. I mean, I just can't
Mhm.
think of that's like a complete no-no. You never go from the Air Force to another one. It's the other
Yeah.
ones coming, realizing their services are not up to the standards of the Air Force. I'm just saying. So
Yeah.
I've got
And
all military families. I'm being facetious, obviously.
yeah, I can't speak to why he left. I
Yeah,
just know that he
yeah,
did. And
yeah,
those were his glory days. I
yeah, yeah,
mean, he
yeah,
was very um,
yeah,
dissatisfied with his life because after he got out
yeah.
of the military, he wasn't able to find a job. And so
Very interesting.
he's dealing with that struggle, just the
Yeah,
challenge of who he is. Like, I mean, with COVID,
yeah,
how many people have lost their
yeah,
job because of the situation?
yeah,
And so your identity is then
yeah,
displaced. It's
yeah,
like, okay, what do I do now that I don't have a
yeah.
job? So,
He must have been a high end performer though, because if I understand, it sounds like he was a combat controller, which is that's a tough field to get into, a very nuanced field in the Air Force.
he wasn't so much a combat controller as he just when he saw combat, he loved it
Oh,
because I think it gave him
yeah,
like an avenue or a method to take out his
yeah.
anger and his frustration.
But it
So,
sounded like what I heard you talk about was that was sort of the field that he was in, was in,
in the Air Force, he was hanging out of helicopters doing machine guns. Now, I don't know if that was his title back then.
yeah,
He did transfer then into the Navy to become a photographer.
yeah, interesting. Yeah,
Very different,
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, kind
yeah,
of thing. You're shooting a gun
yeah,
versus shooting a
yeah,
camera.
yeah. Yes, but but the thing that I was trying to say is that, like, if you grow up in the military, that's your reality, and that's the box
Mm,
that you're in. If you spend 18, 19 years doing that, and I experienced that, and then I went into the Air Force. My dad was Army, went into the Air Force. But the point is when I got out of the military, I considered that I had been in the military for 40 years.
yeah.
19 of them growing up, and then 20 in the Air Force. And the point is that I'm trying to make here for many is that that's your normal, that's your reality, and you don't really know what what another normal is. And so I suspect that as you grew up in this life and finally got out, you must have just constantly looked around and saying, "This is not what I understood." Like for
Yeah.
instance, I heard you talking about love. That your wife,
Yeah.
when you found out that she loved you or she showed love, you were like, "This is not what love is." I mean,
Yeah.
am I making sense here?
Yeah, you are. And my dad was very passive. Somewhere along the way before I really remember stuff of my childhood, my dad gave the reins to my mom. And
Hmm.
I think he just found it easier to play that pacifistic role
Yeah,
and allow her to kind of be in control, almost like my wife did with me. She
interesting.
relented because it was more of a peaceful environment, even
I
though
see.
peace was never really there.
I see.
But in as far as me being alert, yeah, my head was always, you know, to say the term, my head was on a swivel. I'm watching around me because I'm very defensive of because of the environment that I've grown up in,
Yeah.
right? I have to know or try and predict when is my mother going to go off? How is my dad going to react? You know, because
Mm,
it could lead into, physical
mm.
arguments, right?
Wow.
And so, like you talked about with my wife, this was before I realized what was going on, when I was still in a victim state, in a victim mindset, was that my girlfriend, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, she loved me. And I'm not getting into like the whole eros and agape and everything like that.
Right.
Just straight out, as far as her love
Yeah.
was genuine and deep.
Wow.
And it was very different than the manipulative, I guess, love that you would call it at that point. It was what they knew how to give.
Wow.
And so it was very different. Well, when you're confronted with, these people both love you, and one just really hits you at the core and you want more of it, versus the other one, you're trying to run as far as you can from it, it doesn't
Wow.
add up. And so, like we talked about earlier, wanting things to be normal. Well, how am I supposed to process that this young lady loves me? And if this is love, what the heck am I getting at home? And so that that caused an internal conflict. And I mean, I ran for a bit. I tried to push her away because I didn't know what else to do.
That's what you
And
did.
yeah, and so that same behavior of trying to push her away,
Yeah.
we ended up getting married, but that was, again, that distancing played out in our relationship, in the emotional aspects of it. So,
Wow.
oh,
Somebody up
I
above
came
was
with a
looking out
whole
for you, man.
I came with a train full of it, Kevin. I mean,
Wow.
but here's the amazing thing, man, and I don't want this to be lost. There's hope. Like, we're talking about where things were. There's been a transformation.
Let's do
And
it.
now where I'm at, like, I have a vibrant, intimate marriage with my wife. Same lady that was loving me to death. In that, that dichotomy of what is love, still married. We're all 28 years, perfect. No, I'm sure you can already
Absolutely.
tell by the
You know,
conversation.
yeah.
But we persevered through it. The
Mm.
relationship with my 4 adult children, and I say adult because I want you to understand, it's like, as our children are, younger, we can direct them, right? We can
Yes.
order them to do stuff. Man, when they become adults, think about how you were. Did you have to take the same thing that your parents said at the same level? No, you can do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So for my adult children to say, I want this relationship with you, to be able to forgive and have that reconciliation with 4 adult children, and 2 of which have one son each. So I have 2 grandchildren. I mean, that right there. And it's not just me. I've other clients that have done that same thing, where it's like,
Yeah.
they've had that reconciliation, and it takes
Mm.
time because, like I said, on that trust, I manipulated,
Yes.
I lost that trust. It took time. And so I had to be patient
Yeah.
with them, because in my mind, I'm going, I'm different. I want a relationship with you. They're going, I don't know if you're safe or if this is just a
Yeah.
phase or what. So
Yeah.
I needed to be patient with them to learn to trust me.
And
But
if you
there's
fumble the
hope.
ball a couple of times, they
Oh,
start
yeah.
to wait for you then to screw up again. And
Yeah.
like you're saying, they're kind of like, I don't know. I'm not sure I
Yeah.
can actually trust you because you've done this 2, 3 times now. And
Absolutely.
that's it's just more destroying of trust. It's very interesting. So, Mike, tell us about, and it sounds like one of them was forgiveness, that you had to
Mhm.
learn how to forgive your parents.
Mhm.
But talk about other ways that you begin to break these patterns of behaviors and really start to see the light when it comes to healing yourself and your family. What
Yeah.
share some of that with our viewers so that,
Sure.
and me, so we can know how to do some of that.
We've touched on a number of these already. So
Mm-hmm.
one is like the growth mindset. And I've already said I saw myself as a victim. And so if something happened, I was looking at where to place the blame other
Mm-hmm.
than myself.
Yeah.
Now, the the really weird difference in that was when I succeeded at something, I wasn't comfortable with compliments because I had a low worth, and so it just didn't sit well. And so you have to get to a point where you're like, I'm not a victim. This isn't happening to me. How can I see this as a blessing as well? Right. So um, when things don't go right, is what does this create? What kind of opportunity is there in this? So if I'm, arguing with my wife, how can I reconcile this? And what do I have the possibility of doing that I didn't before? Now, I've always had the chance to love her, but I have the chance to love her in a different way to show that, yes, I've genuinely changed. Where she may have it expected that, hey, it's going to take 3 days to have him come down and calm down. If I'm able to do that in, a much shorter time frame, then she's seeing that there's the growth there. It's not just a fly by night kind of change. So,
Very interesting. May
I'm
I
like, you
back
have a
up a
question
second?
there. I can see Kevin.
Well, I want to back up just ever so slightly because I
Yeah.
think what one of the things that you hit about sort of taking responsibility and being accountable for your behavior, that and this is said in all different ways. If you've ever paid attention to Stephen Covey's works, the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People,
Yeah.
he would always say habit number one is to be proactive. And sometimes people misunderstood what he actually meant by that. But what he meant by being proactive was taking, no matter what caused it or how long that you get to a certain point in your life where you have to say, okay, yeah, maybe my parents did this, or maybe a traumatic event or something like this, but I own this stuff, and
Yeah.
now it's on me to fix it. And I want to revisit that just for a second about the
Yeah.
crucialness of taking responsibility for who you are and what you now bring to the table as an adult.
Yeah. If I look and I blame my parents for this stuff,
Yeah.
that means it's out of my hands. I can't control the direction that things
Mm.
go. So if I truly want to make change and I want to have long
Yeah.
lasting change, I need to take ownership in that and go, what did I do that got me here? What am I do that's keeping me here?
Mm.
And what can I learn and do to move forward? Because there's always something we can do that moves us forward. It may not be something we want to do, but we did something that got us there in the first place.
Right.
you
Right.
know, like if you said something to me, I took it the wrong way.
Mm.
Okay. What could I have done differently? I could have asked for clarification. Kevin, is this really what you meant to say? Because if I'm assuming, that could have been what got me there in the first place.
Right.
Then it's like going forward. Hey, Kevin, I apologize. I didn't understand you properly. Can you forgive me for this? That is
That's
hard.
huge. That's
You know,
powerful, though.
yeah, it carries a lot of weight. It's hard to do when it's not something you've
Right.
learned and grown up with.
Right.
But I think that honestly, coming from that place helps us heal, not
Yes.
just the relationship between you and I, but it's also healing for me because it's like, okay, now I don't have to carry, like you talked about guilt earlier. That guilt is brought out into the light, and I can go, Kevin, here it is. Now, if you decide not to forgive me, that's on you. I've done my part to ask for forgiveness and
Hmm.
be repentant, to
Hmm.
apologize.
Yeah.
Um, but
Which, by the way, asking for forgiveness, in my way of thinking, is a lot different than just apologizing and saying I'm sorry.
yeah,
I've learned this a long time ago and try to practice it most of the
yeah,
times, unless, but to give another person, the other person across the table, the opportunity to forgive me and not just say,
yeah.
I apologize, and maybe come back a month later saying, well, man, I apologize. I mean, what do you want? Well, that's not the point. The point is can you allow the other person to forgive you? And that's a different concept, isn't it?
It is. And part of the equation that I do on this side is, if I come to you and I ask for your forgiveness, is
Hmm.
being in a place to hear you out,
Yeah,
to share what you went through and how you
that's right.
felt, because otherwise it's just capping a lid on it. And that's not
Boom.
healthy for the longevity of the relationship. So, I have not handled that well. So I've learned by doing it the hard way. When you ask, wait and don't defend yourself, because that's the other thing. If I'm defending myself, I'm not truly looking to you to say, hey, can you forgive? It's just, here, I put this out,
Man.
you now need to do this. And that's not the truth. You still have freedom in that choice to
Yes.
make what fits you. So
Yes. Dude, that is so powerful. Another strategy may, and I'm making an assumption here though, that
mhm,
I know that you talk about this concept of suffering in silence.
yeah.
So that maybe that's an important strategy for people as well to come out of that silence about their concerns or their problems or whatever the case might be. Would that be in line with some sort of a strategy to help people heal and heal others?
Actually, when I talk about silent suffering, that's in relation to like us as men.
I
So
see.
if you look at the statistics of like depression, you will see the women far outweigh the men. But when you look at suicide, it's, I believe,
Yeah.
like 3 to 1. So we're told, hey, don't raise up, don't speak about this. You're it's a silent suffering where you're not able to speak and
Mm,
voice what's going on because there's so much taboo and just like a misunderstanding of it. Man up, get over it, it was
yeah.
nothing. There's all these things to
Yeah.
just put it off to the side and diminish the severity of it. But without talking about it, guys have emotions as well. I
Sure.
mean, if we didn't, you wouldn't see the anger or the
Right.
depression or the other ways that it plays out. And so the silent suffering is just the fact that we as men are less likely to speak up and
Yeah.
share our emotions and where we're at and what we're thinking. And then that plays out in unhealthy ways. Unfortunately, often to people, just calling it quits.
Right.
So
Yeah. I think you're talking something very important here. And I'm personally, I'm, you know, I think guys can be tough, but I think we create this dichotomy that you're either a tough guy or you're a wuss.
yeah,
And I don't really get along with all of this people talking about this male toxicity and all this kind of stuff. I mean, you know, I won't go down that road, that sort of social road. But my point is that you know you know men are there is a tough side of men.
hmm
They're the men are the hunter gatherers. I mean, people can have their own perspectives about that. The only and disagree with me, but the only point that I'm trying to say is that tough guys can also express emotions. There's nothing
yeah,
wrong with it. So it's not. So I'm saying you don't have to turn from like I'm a tough guy. I can go down and cut trees and take on 10 other guys in warfare. So I'm not saying that you can't be a tough guy,
yeah,
but you can also express love. You can express your emotions and still be a tough guy. Am I making sense there?
yeah. Some of the most amazing men that I know
Hmm.
are the ones that it's like, if I'm ever in a dark alley,
Hmm.
I want you by me,
Right. Yes. Yes.
but they're
That's right.
also the most genuine
Yes.
because you're not having to sit there and
Hmm.
worry. How are you feeling?
Yeah.
What are you thinking? You know, they're there saying,
Hmm.
hey, this is where I'm at. And, they're very self-aware.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not one or the other. You can be tough and be in touch with your emotions and still express them. It's
Exactly.
when we feel isolated and
Yeah.
shut down, and that leads to the depression, the anxiety, the desperation that you don't see another way out
Yes.
other than ending it. And that's not a safe route to go. And I mean, the thing is, what you see publicly, like you could perceive me in a specific way. How I am behind closed doors could be absolutely different, and that's the way it honestly
Right.
was for me, because I wore masks.
Hmm.
Kevin, if you needed me one way, I was that way. If you were the strongest person in the room, that's who I played to. If Betty
Very
over here
interesting.
was the strongest personality and that's whose acceptance and approval I wanted, then I played to them. But when I
Wow.
got home, it was very much that anger. And it
Wow.
is as illogical as it may seem, it was a safe place for me to vent, even though it's hurting the ones that I love most.
Wow. Man, that's powerful. Well, let me ask this, and we've probably got 7, 8, 9 minutes left. I want to first invite anybody, if you have a question for Mike, please post it, and we'll try to answer it if he'll try to answer it if he can, or maybe it's something that you'll do offline or whatever the case might be. So I want to invite people to do that right now. But I also, Mike, want to just ask, and maybe you've kind of already hit on some of it, but I still I'd like to maybe put some steps or some next
Hmm.
steps. So, first of all, you primarily deal with men in their
Correct.
transformation. So let's just say if it's a man, but this can apply to a woman as well, that
Hmm.
they're hearing right now, or maybe they're listening to this later on and thinking, yeah, I got some of that. What would be their next steps? I mean, what would be the first step that you would take to try to again gain some healing, rebuild your relationships? Whatever it is, I'm just
Yeah.
interested in some ideas and some steps, maybe.
Well, one is seeing yourself and where you are in the world differently. Like when we
Mm,
see ourselves as a victim, then we are a
you
victim.
are a victim.
And that just continues to like almost bury us and just continue to amplify and compound the situation. So it's like, okay, like we talked about earlier, seeing things in a different light. The one thing that
Mm,
was hard for me in the beginning was speaking gratitude. So I'm thankful for this. I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for my wife, who I just argued with. If she would
yeah,
only listen to what I said, it,
yeah,
it was one of those.
yeah,
Hey, I love my wife. I'm thankful for my wife because she loves me.
yeah.
It's looking around. What do you have to be grateful for? Because at that point, I wasn't. And so changing our perspective changes our heart, and we see ourselves and the world around us differently. Um, Giving yourself grace and forgiveness. Because,
Mm,
like you talked about the shame,
yeah,
man, I was buried under shame. That was why it was one of the fuels that helped me be so angry that I couldn't watch the Hulk or It's a Wonderful Life, because at the end of the movie where George Bailey loses it and starts yelling at his family, man, you don't need to see your real life played out in a movie.
wow,
And so it's forgiving yourself and giving yourself grace
yeah,
and being able to work on that and extend it to the people around you. The other thing that was crucial for me was looking around and going, who is safe? Who's in a better place than me that I can trust, that I would want to say, hey, this is where I'm at, and work through them, because they're gonna most likely see me in a different light and be able to encourage me on my blind spots. Because at that point, everything was a blind spot.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah, 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 yeah. No, I
Um,
get it. Yeah,
but I mean, honestly, like starting with your perspective and just working from there, like
yeah.
Kevin and I have talked about with a growth mindset, is working from there. And part of that I used was affirmations and gratitude. Now more recently I've
Hmm.
started using affirmations, which is asking the question why. And it's not a far stretch, because you go, you know when you're where I was, it's like, why am I such an idiot? Why, every time you make a mistake, it's a self-deprecating and demeaning question.
Yeah,
When you ask a why question of,
yeah,
why do I love myself? Why am I able to succeed at this? Why do I have
yeah.
self-worth? You're sending your brain on a process to go look for
Boom.
reasons, almost like when you see a miniseries and they leave you on that cliffhanger. Wait a minute, why did they die? Your brain is going through and processing all
Right.
the reasons. And so it's very similar to that, is
Yeah.
just setting yourself in a different mental perspective.
That's a critical question, critical point that you're bringing up there. I believe this concept of, and I've talked about this on other podcasts, the concept of asking questions, but
Hmm.
simple questions. Like why am I doing this, or what can I do to improve, or these simple questions. There's research that shakes this out, that your mind, your brain will go on a search to find the answer.
Yeah.
You know, if you be careful about the questions. I remember when I got out of the Air Force, I did suffer from a pretty serious bout of depression and anxiety. And I remember one of the pivotal moments of turning me around, besides my wife. And by the way, can you tell my wife there is hope? You know, just I just want her to know this. Um, and I'm not going to forget my childhood buddy. One of my best friends. I grew up with. You know, Bill right there. He
Yeah.
said earlier that I traumatized him, but we know that's not the case.
I'll leave the two of you to work that one out
I'm
over
just saying
coffee
that
or
driving
steak,
in a car with him over a couple of years traumatized me. So I'm just saying. But here's the thing that, you know, you when there's different ways to ask questions, and one of the
Hmm.
questions that when I was trying to figure out what was going wrong with my life, I remember asking myself over and over, you know, it was like, God, why are you doing this to me?
Yeah.
And that's a different question than asking, and this is where a lot of it flipped. It was a
Yeah.
bit of an epiphany when I started saying, God, what are you asking of me?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, those are two different questions there that lead you down different paths.
Hmm.
Am I making sense to you? And can you shed light on
Yes.
that?
So it goes back to like how we were talking about the whole victim and being a victim where I was growing up
Yeah.
is when we're asking why me?
Why
Why
me?
is
There you
this
go.
happening to me? Is
Mm,
very much from a space of you're not able to do anything about it.
right.
You have no control or function or actions to
Yeah.
get anywhere else. When you ask the question, like you said, what are you trying to teach me? You know, what can I learn from this? It's then expanding. And there's that place of growth that you can go to. Like, um, you know, what next level are you trying to take me to that I need to
Hmm.
learn this lesson?
Right.
It just paints things so
Yeah.
differently. I mean, if you step outside and let's just say you're at Yosemite, right? Amazing vistas
Hmm.
and views. But if you're looking at it through a really like a welder's helmet, you're not going to see the same thing
Interesting.
as if you put on like these amazing sunglasses that bring about the color and the vividness and the brightness.
Wow.
You know, we're almost limiting our our visibility into what's going on, and we're
Very
missing the
interesting.
opportunities that are about us.
Very, very interesting. Boy, that's so well said. Well, listen, I have one more question for you. I do
Sure.
want to ask, and then I'm going to ask you about where people can find you. But I can't help to ask because I just mentioned it, and you talked about how to stave off, you know, depression and anxiety. Can you share a thought? I can't help but to ask you that before
Yeah.
we close here. Some thoughts about staving off depression and anxiety, which so many people are suffering from.
It is, yeah, it is rampant. I mean, and especially
Mm,
was last year and still with
yes.
COVID here and everything that's going on, it's
Hmm.
very prevalent. I have my own daily habits, both in the morning and at night. So I have a routine as far as it sets me up to come into things the best that I can. So,
Mm,
you know, and what's amazing is my routine is for me. It's what energizes me. Kevin, yours could be absolutely different because, you know, like if you're going, I I really don't like journaling, you know, or if you do like journaling, I'm not a
hmm.
big fan on journaling. So I'll do really short kind of almost like cliff notes,
Yeah.
or I'll do audio. It fits
Yes.
me and my personality with like my dyslexia is I just need to create something that's going to create success, you know, to get me to the point where I need to be.
Yes.
And so I shut down in the same way, you know, end my evening so that I'm in a healthier place. The other thing, just like I talked about, um, you know, having people around you that are further ahead, that
Yes.
are in a healthy place,
Mm,
is that for me is I look to my friends and now I look to my wife. I mean, she's like my best friend. So, you know, she's very pivotal. Um, but it's one of those of if they see anything in me that's off, speak up. And
wow.
I'm I've gotten myself to a place where I will ask, "Hey, how am I doing? Do you see anything where I'm
Yes.
off?" Because if I focus on something there, then I may lose focus over here and not do as well, which that's more critical. But, I'm wanting to grow in a new direction. I still need visibility around me, to kind of keep me on the straight and narrow, right? Because 2 degrees will take you in a totally different direction than you're wanting to go. But it's having those habits. I make sure that I get plenty of sleep. The journey that I'm on right now is more on the health side, because when I was in IT, it was a badge of honor to like try and get by on
Yeah.
4 hours of sleep.
Right. Yeah.
It it isn't
Forget
paying
that
off.
stuff, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
but it's like as long as I'm sleeping well, I'm getting in my exercise, and that's counterintuitive. It's
Yeah.
like I'm depressed, I have no energy. But
Yeah.
guess what? That energy comes from the physical
Yes.
aspect there, and going and working out, and it
Yes.
releases chemicals up in your brain, which puts you in a different place. So
Yes.
yeah, I mean,
Yes.
that's part of it. There's a whole lot more to it, but I would say people that it's like are around you, being physically active, getting sleep, eating
Yeah.
well. Because
Yeah.
if you're eating sugar, it just doesn't fuel your brain well.
Oh,
That's
please
a
don't
whole
go
nother
there. Yeah.
uh, that's a whole nother conversation.
Please, I'm trying. Listen, I do have one question
Sure.
actually that came up. Actually, it's from my sister. And
Cool.
she was asking, is there a better way to approach someone about reconciliation, with someone who wants to be a
Oh,
victim and stay
mm.
mad? That's a great question.
That is a really packed one. So I I would say give lots of grace and patience to the person. The
Mm.
challenge is going to be just like I encountered with my parents, is if they're not in a place
Right.
where they're happy even with themselves, finding that reconciliation or finding them in a place where they're willing to let go, um, can be challenging. And so the best that we can do at times is often just asking it and putting it out there. Now you're not tying your worth or any kind of validation to that. Please don't do that, because that's a choice on their side as to whether they accept it and
Yeah.
decide to grant it.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're in a place where we can
Yeah.
give the grace and the forgiveness
Yeah.
for their behavior and ask for their forgiveness, but we can't go beyond that.
Yeah. And goodness, that might be the best. It's interesting. I have a group of managers that I coach. We do a small group coaching session every couple of weeks. And we had this very topic come up yesterday about, dealing with people, that, don't want to reconcile.
Yeah.
They rather be angry. They rather be victim, whatever it is. And then what do you do about it? And one of the things that came up was this concept of patience. It's along the lines of what you're saying,
Yeah.
but that it can be tough to have a patience over a period of time. And where do you finally go, you know what? I'm just done.
Yeah.
And that's tough. I mean, it really is.
And part of it, Kevin, because I was that guy. Like, it's
Mm,
a place of being in power,
yeah.
right? I'm
Yeah.
able to almost
Yeah.
lord this over you. It's a
Yes.
passive way of it, but if I realize that I
Yes.
have control in it, then I can take that power play.
Yeah.
But it's also one of, there's almost comfort if I was in a place where I didn't like things. Remember, I'm a victim.
Hmm.
Anger is like how I react to stuff.
Yeah.
Um, it's uncomfortable to forgive, and
Hmm.
it leaves me in a place where that's almost my default
Yeah.
behavior. So reacting in that genuinely was not something that I was going to do. And
Mm.
the way I saw forgiveness was way different than probably what you're experiencing,
Very
because
interesting.
I
Yeah.
could have said, yes, I forgive you, but still retaining it, right? I'm in a
Yeah.
place of anger and hurt. So
Yeah.
you got to understand, I was skewed. And so that
Yeah.
may be the same situation. I don't know the specifics, but
Yeah.
the best you can do, and it's hard it can be hard to accept from our side of health, is just offering it and letting them respond.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just, I will say this one more time. I just find it be so critical and so crucial to all of our lives. And that is that we all begin to train ourselves and develop our minds into
Yeah.
this concept of taking ownership for our stuff. I do see people from time to time, maybe often, who are trying to reconcile, who are trying to do the right thing, who want that serious conversation, but the person on the other end simply will not take responsibility for their
Yeah.
part, if you will, or their defiance, or their pushing back, or whatever you want to put on it. And it just, you know,
Is it
that's
okay to offer like 3 book recommendations, kind of what we've
I
talked
would
about
love
here
it.
today?
Please do. Yeah.
Um, so as far as one thing that helped me with my parents as I was growing, and I talked about keeping them at like a distance, right? Having boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Boundaries is an amazing book. Can be
Boundaries.
challenging
Mm-hmm.
to act it out and
Mm-hmm.
follow it, because if you're used to just, I was coming from a place of people pleasing as well, so understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But boundaries are an amazing thing because it releases like that control that other people can have over us,
Right.
and that's by Dr. Henry Cloud.
Mm.
So boundaries by Dr. Henry Cloud. The other one we've talked about, ownership, like taking responsibility for ourselves. Um, Forgive me on the last name on this one. I think it's Jocko Willink. He's an ex-SEAL, and it's extreme ownership.
Yes.
So, I
I've
mean,
read Cliff Notes from that thing.
oh,
I've got 10 books stacked up, that I need to read. But that one, I mean,
yeah,
I'm hearing that is the joint right there.
it is
Say it one
very
more time though,
powerful.
real quick.
It's extreme ownership,
Yeah, extreme
and it's
ownership. Yeah,
Jocko, and his last name does start with a W. I think it's Willink, but
yeah,
I could have that incorrect.
yeah.
So
I think that's
I
correct,
apologize
actually.
on that.
Mm-hmm.
The third book, when I talked about affirmations and we're asking why questions, is by Noah St. John. And so that's helping us, like you talked about the phrasing of our questions, like not
Mm-hmm.
just going, why me, why this,
Yeah,
but, asking more open-ended, like growth questions.
yeah.
That's what he does, and it sets your brain off on
Very
how.
nice.
So you're looking for solutions to questions, but they're not from a disempowered place,
Right.
from like a
Yeah. Very,
victim
very good.
place.
What's the name of that one again? That last one?
Affirmations. So it's
Affirmations.
AFFO
Affirmations. Yes.
and then
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
RMATIONS.
So if people were thinking, "Wow, I'd love to get one of these books," which one would you, just off the cuff, would you jump on first?
Um, it depends on the person's
Oh, I see.
situation.
Good
I
point. Yeah.
know that for me, where I was, boundaries was the first one that helped me.
Okay, that's outstanding.
Just because I was able to kind of almost put a perimeter, like as in a fort,
Yeah.
and in that safer place,
Yeah.
that really helped facilitate my healing,
Yeah.
because otherwise I'm still dealing with mom and dad, and allowing them to take control and have power over
Got it.
my life, and that wasn't at all what needed to happen.
Yeah.
So
Got it. Got it. Well, listen. Wow, Mike. Thank you.
my
Really.
pleasure.
Thank you for your honestly, for your vulnerability, for your candor, for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. I mean, just really opening. I think it takes honestly a lot of courage, really, to open your life up and tell stories that may, you know, that are difficult. And I have such great appreciation for that, because we're learning from your mistakes, if you want to put it that
Yeah.
way, or your life's journey. And I just
Well,
really
yeah.
appreciate it. Would you mind telling the folks where they can find you? I will put all
Yeah.
of this, of course, in the show notes at the
I
end, but
appreciate it.
tell people where they can find you. And
I appreciate it. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for
please,
having me on here to be able to share this,
my
because my
pleasure.
my desire is that it's like we heal so that our children and grandchildren don't inherit the legacy that we leave. So thank you,
Yes.
my friend. If you listen to podcasts, then come join me. There are other men who are sharing their transformation, the hope, and how they've made those changes. So that's it. Living Fearless Today is the name of the podcast.
Living
And
Fearless Today, right?
you can easily get to the podcast. If you don't have a preferred platform, you can go living fearless today podcast.com.
Okay.
That will get you there as well. But
Otherwise, people find on Spotify and whatever, right?
yeah, Spotify,
Okay.
Apple, any
All
of
of
the
that, yeah.
platforms.
Okay.
If you find it on a platform and or if you look on a platform and it's not there, let me know.
Let you know. Got it. Yes.
And then you can find me on the social platforms at Hi Coach Mike, HICOACHMIKE. So just think
Okay.
hi.
Yeah.
But
Very
yeah,
nice. Yeah. Well, listen, once again, thank you so much, Mike. And I look forward to really staying in touch and listening to your podcast and following along. And I just appreciate your time so much. It's really, really gracious of you.
my pleasure, my friend. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, sir. We will talk to you soon then, okay?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, listen, wow. Just good stuff. To me, there's nothing like just sharing your life story and sharing struggles, and we all get to learn from that. And I hope you enjoyed this particular live stream. And of course, the podcasts continue after this. So once this is over, it gets recorded to Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube. And like his, we are just, matter of fact, I want to give a shout out. He's in the background to my new producer, Francisco, who's helping me with all of this. And he's converting all of these into an actual podcast where you can, again, find it on Spotify and all of these other sorts of things. So I will lastly say, listen, if you have a topic that you're interested in, that that you want to learn more about or hear more about, or if you know someone who's got this really interesting story that can help us, then please drop a comment in the drop a comment in the comment section, or email me or hit me up on Facebook or whatever the case might be. But in any event, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you out there on the web or in person. Take care.